friends and net aspirants, welcome back to our channel High Point. I hope you are doing great in your life, and like I said in the previous video, I am here with a defense of poetry. That is the main topic of today's video. And so before we enter into the video, let me tell you about my website www.highpoint.in. About it you must be familiar with. You can go to the website and see, and you can have the free trial and the demo materials there I have given, and you can find 900 plus audio lectures, 300 plus downloadable PDFs, and practice and previous question paper, whole previous question papers from 2004 itself I have given there. So you can have all of them and you can practice them live in the website, and you can know your progress and marks instantly as soon as you finish your exam. So isn't that great? And you can find what all topics that we are covering, and if you are studying your own, this will also help you to know what you have to study, what you have to avoid, what you have to give importance, and what you have to give less importance. And along with the website, you can join a WhatsApp group. I have given the link to join the WhatsApp group in the description box. You go and check the description box, and you can click the link and join the WhatsApp group, in which I will be providing daily quizzes related to English language and literature, and also many more notes and notes in the form of capsules that will be easy to memorize, right? I won't give long essays and all, but I will give notes in the form of capsules, which will be, you can save them in the form of study cards and all. And also you can have any discussions there related to UGC Net English. If you want any further help, you can message me or call me or WhatsApp me in the number given in the screen. Like if you don't know what to study or where to start your study, how you have to arrange your schedules in order to study, how you can create your own timetable in order to start a study towards UGC Net English language and literature. So and things related to research, you can obviously call me and you can have my help. I'll be very glad to give away my help free of cost. Okay, so yeah, let's begin our class about the defense of, or a defense of poetry, which was published in the year 1595, which is obviously after the death of Philip Sidney. So this is Philip Sidney, and about Philip Sidney we have already seen in the previous video elaborately about Philip Sidney. And Philip Sidney belongs to the age of Elizabeth, and he is one of the most eminent poet and critic of the age. And Philip Sidney lived from 1554 to 1586, and like I said, he is a great poet critic of the Elizabethan age, and he has written poems like Arcadia, Astrophil, and Stella, and his most eminent critical work known as A Defense of Poetry. So let me move on to the next slide. The next slide, we have the introduction. I'm just giving the general introduction to the defense of poetry by Sidney, because why he has written such a defense and what motivated him to write such a defense of poetry. Okay, see, if you see the Elizabethan age and the previous age is age of revival, that we all know. And in these two ages we can see that in age of revival we cannot see much great works. Utopia is there, but still we cannot see much great work of great artists like Shakespeare, Ben Jonson, or literature was not at all in a way, it was not flourishing, because people during that time, they spend much time in learning classical language and translating them into English. Not they were producing much great works, and they were not putting their efforts upon creating something very genuine in English language. So that was the one of the reasons. So we can see that after that we have Elizabethan age, but in Elizabethan age even poetry is there in many forms, sonnets, lyrics, and there, but still poetry is not the towering genre of this age. So mainly by defending by defending poetry, he also says that what are the reasons for this general decline of poetry during these ages. Okay, And so the defense of poetry is a spirited defense of poetry against all the charges laid against it. So there were some people, some persons of importance. They came up with a certain, criticism and a certain charges against poetry. Like it's an, it's an abusive school, and it's an unnecessary, not worthy school, and also not worthy genre, and also being a great poet and being a poet himself, he found it's his duty to defend and respond to such charges, and bring back the legitimacy of poetry, and cite some problems with the contemporary literature as such. So what was the original title of the work? The Defense of Poesy. Okay, so this was the original title, The Defense of Poesy, and we commonly use it as Defense of Poetry. And it was written partly as a response to Stephen Gorson's School of Abuse. See, Stephen Gorson, he is a contemporary of Sidney, and Stephen Gorson has written a work on our School of Abuse referring to poetry. So Gorson called School of Abuse or poetry as the School of Abuse. So it's a school of abuse. Nobody should learn it. No worthy man should spend his time upon learning poetry or creating poetical works. That is a waste of time. That was Stephen Gorson's main idea, and he put many, he put many proofs in order to, substantiate his idea. But still, when Sidney came to know about it, he was actually quite annoyed about such baseless allegations against poetry, and he responded in a spirited way in this work, A Defense of Poetry. And he actually responds to this work is a partially this work is a response to Stephen Gorson's allegations that he makes against poetry in his work School of Abuse. So that's first of all the main reason for creating such a defense of poetry by Sidney. And in that work, School of Abuse, Gorson stated that a man could employ his time more usefully than in poetry, that it is mother of lies. So he calls poetry as School of Abuse first of all, then later he calls poetry as mother of all lies. So Sidney takes all these allegations, all these charges against poetry one by one, and he necessarily, absolutely, aptly responds and he gives necessary response to all these charges made by not only Gorson but generally people used to believe. And Sidney said that poetry alone teaches. So he actually says many things in this in defense of poetry. So one among is that every other branch of study actually aims at good deeds. It has to promote man to do good deeds or good action, right? But poetry is the only one that not only tells and not only teaches and instruct people about good action, good deeds, and about good life and all, but also it promotes and moves a person's mind into doing such great virtuous actions. So in that way, he also, like Austin, Sidney also lays too much, many kinds of proofs in order to, in order to prove the worthiness or importance of poetry in many ways. So yeah, let's see that one by one. Here the work also got a general introduction in the book, The Defense of Poetry. Let's begin. In the introduction itself, so what is there? The book has an introduction. So in that book introduction, what does he say? He justifies his own praise of poetry. So in the introduction itself, he justifies why he should praise poetry. Okay, by citing an example of John Pietro Pagliano, who praised horses and horsemanship very highly. So John Pietro Pagliano is a man and he praised horses and horsemanship very highly. Just like that, he's a man of horse because he deals with horses and he himself is a horsemanship. He is that kind of a man, this Pagliano, this person. So the same way, since Philip Sidney is a poet, and it's his duty, so that is the justification that he gives, that why he should, it's fair enough that he praises poetry. So that is the introduction that he gives about poetry, in a defense of poetry. Now he first point that he makes about poetry is the antiquity of poetry. Antiquity means its ancientness. So we can see that poetry in all nations precedes other branches of learning. If you take the history of a nation, take the history of any nation, you can see poetry from the ancient times. Everything there was there in the history, or in the people, whatever written, that is there present in that time, all were in poetical form. Whether it is history, whether it is anything related to science, everything. See, 3000 or 4000 years back, you will see poetry, but you won't see psychology as well. You won't see any of these new branches of study. So before the sprouting of any other new branch of learning, before any other branch of learning, poetry was there in all nations, and this is common to every other nation. That Philip Sidney makes in that point, that he emphasizes in this point of antiquity of poetry, that he says that in all nations poetry precedes, poetry comes before, poetry was there before any other branch of learning. And poets are the fathers of learning. So since it was there from time immemorial, it is the father of learning. So poetry or poets are the father of learning, and so must be respected for their antiquity. So since they are present from the beginning of a nation, from the beginning, from the history, from the beginning of the history of a land, since because of that antiquity that poetry possesses, poets are need to be venerated, and poets are need to be respected for their antiquity, because we can consider them as the father of learning. And philosophers and historians appeared under the mask of poets. So there were historians, there were philosophers, and there were scientists. So everyone actually wrote their works in poetical forms only. That we can see, it's common in every other land. So philosopher and historians, they appeared before people. They appeared, they wrote their works under the mask of poets. And the beauty of Plato's works depends upon poetry. So Plato was a great philosopher, and he banished poets. I mean, maybe bad poets who do abuse of poetry from his ideal land. Plato banished them. So even Plato's beauty, Plato is regarded as a great poet because he wrote his works in such a poetical way. So the beauty of Plato's works, it depends upon poetry itself. Moving on, another point that he makes is that poetry, its universality. Now he has made some points related to antiquity of poetry. Now he says that poetry, it is a universal thing. Poetry has flourished all ages and countries, even in the uncivilized. So in every other land, whether the land has a written form of language, whether it is not having any, it has no written kind of language, even then, even among the uncivilized, poetry has flourished. There will be some sort of songs, some sort of poetry, and philosophies and histories and scientific treatises were written in poetry, in the form of poetry. So poetry as an art, as a medium of communication, it has flourished all ages, all time, and all countries, even among the uncivilized nations, or in uncivilized group of people. And poetry sharpened the wit of people. So by hearing poetry, even the uncivilized people, their manners sharpened, their wit sharpened, their quality sharpened. So poetry has this kind of universality, that we can see that poetry precedes all other branch of study, as well as it flourished, it emerged all over this land, all over this planet, where even we can, even if we cannot find a written language in many uncivilized group of people, but still there will be some poetic elements. Poetry will be there flourishing. Okay. And the next point that he makes is that poetry, its long continuity. Poetry is long lasting since it began from, we can see poetry in the beginning of the history itself. Before history itself, poetry was there, and poetry is long lasting, and it survived all these years, all these times, all these centuries. It begins early in the history of nation and lasts the longest. So we can see how whatever happens and whatever not happen, even then poetry will be there. It begins early before the history of every nations, and it will last long. Long as far as the nation is there, as far as people are there in the nation. So that is the longevity or continuity that we can find in connection with poetry. The next point that he makes is universal veneration of poets and poetry. So throughout these centuries, we can see that poetry precedes all branch of learning. Poetry is universal, and poetry continues for longest, and poetry is the longest surviving branch of study. And it is because of all these reasons we can say a universal kind of veneration, respects were given to poets and poetry. So both Greeks and Romans, so we can see Greek and Romans were the cradles of civilization, and both the Greek and Romans honored poets. And in Roman we have a particular word known as vats. Vats, commonly they called poets as vats. So Roman called poets vats, and poets meaning, the word vats meaning is prophet. Okay, so they find a synonym with the poets and prophet. That's why poets were called as vats. And in Greek also they have a word, and the word means maker or creator. They calls poet as maker or creator. And the oracles, in Roman and Greek, the gods will give oracles, like Apollo's oracle, and you must be, it is familiar in mythical stories. So the oracles were delivered in verse. Only a poet could understand them, and only a poet could explain them to the people, and those who are the honored people or the common people. Not everyone can understand the oracle of the gods, so because they were delivered in verse form. And in the Bible also, in Bible, holy David himself is a poet, and it would be wrong to condemn poets and poetry. So because of all this, every other religion, every other place, in every other land, poets and poetry, they were from the beginning or beyond the beginning of history itself. So it is wrong to condemn, and it is wrong to give negative allegations against poetry and poets. Oh, moving on, the next point which was made by Philip Sidney is that the definition of poetry, its nature and functions. He now takes on about the definition of poetry. So he defines poetry is an art of imitation. Poetry imitates, and poetry is speaking picture, and its end is to teach and delight. So these are the two major definitions that he gives in his A Defense of Poetry. Poetry is an art of imitation, and poetry is speaking. Poetry is a speaking picture. And what is the end? What is the purpose of poetry? Is to teach and delight. Both pleasure and instruction. These two are the end of poetry. And he now divides poetry. Okay, he gives divisions of poetry. He divided poetry into three broad divisions. So he divides poetry into three broad divisions. So first one is religious poetry. Religious poetry is obviously hymns about gods and praises about gods. Poetry that praises gods. The next one is philosophical or informative poetry. So this kind of poetry, it will impart knowledge of philosophy, history, astronomy. So various kind of knowledges will be imparted through poetry. Such poetry is known as philosophical or informative poetry. And the third category is the right or true kind of poetry. Okay, third category, he labels it as the right or true kind of poetry, where the poet who writes this kind of poetry are the real makers of poetry in its true sense. So the first and second category of poetry are there, and he finds no harm and no wrong with these two category of poetry. But the third category of poetry, the poets who creates the poet who create these kind of true or right kind of poetry, they are the true makers in real sense. And it is divided into heroic. See, this right kind or true kind of poetry is divided into heroic, lyric, tragic, comic, satiric, iambic, and pastoral. And he one by one he defines and he tells about each one of these category of the right or true kind of poetry. The first one is pastoral poetry. Pastoral poetry deals with the loveliest life and arouse sympathy and admiration for simple life. So pastoral poetry is mainly about shepherds, the low strata people, or the simple kind of life that they are living. So it is about the loveliest life, and it mainly arouses sympathy and admiration for simple life and hatred for act of cruelty and tyranny. So at the same time it arises sympathy and admiration for simple life. At the same time it also promotes hatred for acts of cruelty and tyranny. Now the next category is elegiac poetry. Elegiac poetry, now we refer to elegies when we mourns over, when we write a poetry that mourns over a death of a dear ones, a dear man, a particular person. But in the ancient time, elegy was a poetry. Elegy is a poem in which it is written in elegiac meter, not necessarily mourning over the death of a person, but it necessarily aroused sympathy and for the suffering and the miserable. So elegiac poetry arouses sympathy and sympathy for the suffering and the miserable, and it softens the heart. So that is the virtue of elegiac poetry. Then comes satire. Satire, it loves folly out of court. So it laughs at the folly of man, laughs at folly and vices of noble persons. And the fourth category is comedy. Okay, comedy, it is an imitation of common errors in ridicule fashion. So we ridicules common errors in a funny manner, that is comedy, and so is effective in warning men against such errors. So when we represent such errors, common errors, and ridicule them in poetry and make comedy out of them, so it is effective in warning man against such errors, if somebody is going to commit them. And tragedy reveals the wickedness of man. So the next category is tragedy, which reveals the wickedness of men in high places and brings home to men the uncertainty of life. So tragedy is something that will end in a tragic manner. So tragedy will happen, not like just like that any tragedy won't happen. So there will be some wickedness going on in men of high places. Some people will do something that will cause at the end these tragic events happen. So in order to happen all these tragic events, some wickedness will be there that will be done by men in high places. So, and it also reveals about the uncertainty of life. So some people who are actually high class or high position people, they will lose all these high position and ultimately lead to their own tragic end because of the wicked deeds that they have done ultimately. So in that way the uncertainty of life is revealed through tragedy as well. The next category of poetry is lyric. Lyric is hymns, the praise of men and God, and thus enkindles virtue and courage. So lyric, they are hymns and they are written in praise of men and God, and it actually ignites virtue and courage. It will promote virtue and courage among men. The next category is epic, and he calls it as the best and the most effectively portrayed form of poetry. So Philip Sidney calls epic as the best and most effectively portrayed form of poetry, and it represents pictures of heroic men and heroic action, and thus inspires men to heroic action. So this is the best kind of poetry in which we can find pictures of heroic men and their great deeds, heroic actions, and thus inspires men to heroic actions further. Now, so these are the categories that he is dealing with, 7 categories of poetry that he says in his A Defense of Poetry. Now comes Another point that he makes in defense of poetry: the end of learning is best served by poetry. So this is the most important uh, point that in defense of poetry that he makes. Okay, poetry is superior to all other branches of learning. So Stephen Gosson says that poetry is all lies. Poetry is the mother of lies, and it is worthless to spend some time on studying poetry. We can spend our precious time on studying something else. Okay, something more precious. But he says that Sidney says that poetry is superior to all branch of study, all branch of learning. How? Because the end point of every other branch of study is virtuous action. No, people need to be promoted to do virtuous action. That is the end of every other learning, isn't it? So, but poetry is the one that serves this this goal very well. Let's see to that. So, sciences do not serve the true end of learning, which is self-knowledge and which leads to well-doing. Okay, science will provide some knowledge about many phenomena. Science will provide many knowledge, many information about many phenomena, but will not, or most of the time it won't promote us to do or lead us to do well things, to do well actions, good actions. But poetry is not like that. Poetry will tell about truths, universal truth, and it will teach us, it will provide knowledge about many various abstract things that we are needed in our life, and it will also promote and move us to do virtuous action. So the end of all learning is virtuous action, and poetry best serves this end. Okay, and the next point by Sidney is poetry conducive to good action. So this is exactly what I was saying. So poetry not only gives us a knowledge of virtue, but also moves us to virtuous action. So this is the most eminent quality of poetry. Okay, poetry tells about truth, universal truth, abstract truths, and virtuous things and great deeds by virtuous men and all. So it not only gives knowledges of such sort, but it will also move us to do great virtuous actions of this sort. And because it conveys truth in a delightful manner. So how we are moved to do great actions after reading poetry? Because poetry is conveying all these virtues, all these knowledges about virtuous actions by great men in a delightful manner, in a beautiful manner, in a pleasurable manner. That's why it convinces us and it moves us to do great action. And it wins the mind from wickedness to virtue. So it wins the mind. So poetry wins our mind and it will move us from wickedness to virtue. And it teaches more perfectly than either history or philosophy. So in history, by reading historical documents and philosophical documents, we will get more knowledges, we will get wisdom, but it teaches more perfectly because it serves its end more perfectly. Poetry serves its end more perfectly because it not only impart knowledge but move us to do that virtuous action that we have already got an idea in poetry. So it teaches more perfectly than either history or philosophy. Let's see next point by Sidney in defense of poetry. Sidney's justifications to the criticism. So now he comes to the criticism, particular criticism made by certain persons like Gosson, and he says that certain critics merely laugh and scoff at poetry without any reason. Such poets are to be ignored. He says that there are a group of critics, certain critics are there, and they scoff, they laugh at poetry, they just make fun of poetry without any reason. They don't have any relevant reason to say. They simply make some gestures and simply make some comments and they scoff and laugh at poetry. Such irrelevant critics, such poets are to be ignored, and they are merely humorous kind of gestures. They are funny creatures, nothing else. They are making they are humorous kind of gestures, nothing else. We have to ignore them, do not take them in serious. And Sidney further says that Sidney's justification of verse and rhyme. So now he says about verse and rhyme. Poetry is said to be more rhyming and versifying by some. To them, Sydney says that rhyme is not the essence of poetry, but it is desirable to use it. So I have obviously seen one of the question related to this particular point made by Sydney. I think in 2019 question paper, that who said among the given philosophers and critics, who said rhyme is not an essence of poetry. So it was Sydney and Wordsworth. So not Wordsworth, Horace. Okay, so that was the correct answer, Sydney and Horace. So these two people mentioned that rhyme is not an essence of poetry. So for many people, what is poetry? Poetry is rhyming and versifying for many. So poetry is merely not rhyming and versifying. Poetry is something higher than that. It tells higher truths and more virtuous actions it promotes. So Sydney says that rhyme is not the essence of poetry. You have to make a note of this point. Okay. Sydney says that rhyme is not. What is not an essence of poetry? Rhyme is not the essence of poetry. It is not. Poetry is not rhyme. And rhyme is not the essence or central part of poetry, but it is desirable to use it. So when you write poetry, it is desirable. It will give more beauty, and it will give a kind of it will be helpful to memorize the lines and all. So for that reason, to provide some beauty and to provide some kind of ornament to the poetry, it is desirable to use. Rhyme is desirable to use, but it is not the essence of poetry. And rhyme is, he says that rhyme is a polish to the speech. So rhyme is only a polish to the speech that will deviate from the common kind of speech. When we usually speak in a language, we are not using any rhyme scheme and all, right? But it is a, when we use rhyme, it is a polish, an extra glittering that we are given to the speech. And rhyme regulates verbal harmony, and it imparts order and proportion so pleasing to men. Okay, so we usually in poetry we are using rhyme in order to regulate verbal harmony, in order to find a verbal harmony, in order to bring a verbal harmony in poetry, in order to give, in order to impart order and proportion that will be pleasing to men, that will be pleasing to the readers of poetry. Okay, so that is another thing why we are using rhyme. And it adds to words the sensuous and emotional quality to music. So when we use certain kind of rhyme, certain kind of rhyme, it will add some sensuous and emotional quality to the music of the poetry. And the fourth reason why it is desirable to use rhyme is it is an aid to memory. So if you learn, if you read something in rhyme, something rhymingly, if some rhymes are there, then it will be an added polish to the speech. It will give some proportion and order, and it will give some emotional and sensual quality to it, and it will also helpful in memorizing it. Okay, so harmony, when there is harmony itself, then it will be very easy to learn and memorize, right? So you have to find such a harmony in learning about literature as well. Otherwise, it will be a tedious job to do. Let me remind you. The next one is poetry for specific charges and Sydney's reply. So Stephen Gosson has made 4 specific charges against poetry, and he is telling replies in defense of poetry. Sydney is giving replies about them, about all these charges. First one is poetry is useless and it is a waste of time. There are other more fruitful knowledge. So this is the exact line that Gosson uses there. There are other more fruitful knowledge. A man better spend his time in them than in poetry. So he says that it's a waste of time because there is nothing particular that we are going to get out of poetry. Okay, but Sydney said that, like he said already, that poetry is conducive to virtuous action and it serves its aim of any branch of study more efficiently. So he says that poetry is Conducive to virtuous action means poetry will promote virtuous action. Not only it will tell about universal truth, and it will tell about general abstract ideas or truth related to life and philosophies and all, but it will move man to virtuous action. Okay, and it serves this aim of virtuous action more fruitfully, more effectively and efficiently than any other branch of study, like he already explained. The second allegation was that poetry is the mother of lies. In poetry, all we can find lies. So poetry is mother of lies. So the poet, Sidney says that nothing affirms and therefore he never lieth. In poetry, he says that a poet never affirms anything. He says, this is it, nothing beyond, nothing after it. He never says that. Poetry, nothing affirms. It tells about an abstract truth. It tells about a universal kind of fiction. In a mask of fiction, it tells universal kind of truth. It affirms nothing. But so it never lieth. Since if it affirms nothing, we cannot say that poetry is lying. So do remember this particular line from the work itself. Okay. For to lie is to affirm what is not true. So what is lie? Lie is to affirm. Lie is to state something as true which is not true at all. Since poet, they are not affirming, they are not stating anything, so they are not lying. So a poet offers not fact but fiction. So you cannot find facts in poetry, but fiction, yet fiction embodying truth of an ideal kind, an abstract, an ideal kind, or a universal kind of truth we can find in a fictitious way, not in a factual way. Okay. So that was the explanation or reply given by Sidney for the second allegation. The third charge made against poetry was that poetry has a wanton or corrupting influence. Okay, poetry has a wanton or corrupting or a bad or negative influence of our people. So here he says that there are some poetry like that which has wanton or corrupting influence of our people, but this is not a fault of poetry. So the fault is not with poetry, but the contemporary abuse of poetry. Okay, so the poet, some poets, some contemporary poets, they are using poetry in an abusive way. They are using poetry, the quality of poetry, the faculty of poetry in a bad way, in an abusive way. They are abusing poetry. So it is not poetry. It is not the fault of poetry. Okay. So such kind of actions are there from some less important poets. So some contemporary poets are abusing poetry. For this kind of abuse of poetry, the entire poetry should not be blamed. Okay, so some poets are abusing poetry. For that reason, the entire poetry cannot be blamed. So there are particular cases in which some poetry are there. They have wanton or corrupting influence of people, but that happens when poetry is abused by certain kind of poets. So for this reason, the entire poetry should not be blamed or charged against. Okay. The next allegation made against poetry was that Plato has banished poets from his ideal commonwealth. So Plato, he says in his work known as Dialogue. So here Plato has written a work known as Dialogue, and in which he tells about his ideal commonwealth, his ideas about an ideal commonwealth, okay, utopian place, and in which he says that he will banish all the poets from his ideal commonwealth. So that is another argument. Plato is a great philosopher, so there must be some reason why he is banishing all poets from his ideal commonwealth. So for that reason, poetry is a necessary discipline. So he says that Sidney replies it like this. Plato was not against poetry. So first of all, poetry is a good and noble discipline, and Plato was not against poetry, but the abuse of poetry. Like he made the previous response, he says that Plato was not against poetry, but the abuse of poetry. For this kind of abuse of poetry, you cannot blame the entire poetry, okay? So Plato himself is a born poet. So how Plato himself is a born poet, for that reason he cannot blame the entire poetry. But he blamed the abuse of poetry because a large part of his dialogue is in poetic form only. So he was a great philosopher, ancient great philosopher, Plato himself. And himself he has written dialogue, and the large part of the large virtue of dialogue is that his work dialogue is that it is in poetic form. Okay. Now he goes into some general discussion about his contemporary English poetry and drama. Okay. So reasons for decline of contemporary English poetry and drama. And the first reason that he gives is that peaceful years have bred a tame and sluggish generation devoid of the ardent and generous spirit necessary for poetic creation. So if you see history towards the end of Age of Revival and in the age of Elizabeth also, we can see that comparatively, comparing to the previous ages, this time end part of the age of revival and the beginning or throughout the age of Elizabeth, we can see a peaceful years are there. We cannot see much internal struggles, much battles are not there, many battles and struggles, that kind of peacelessness we cannot see. So he says that, Sidney says that peaceful years that people experienced bred, created a tame and sluggish, very lazy generation because they did not experience any tumult or turbulence in their life. They became so tame and sluggish, and they are devoid of the necessary ardent spirit that is needed for poetic creation. So that is the one reason for the decline of contemporary poetry and drama. The next one is poets are base people and servile wits, worldly and uninspired. See, these people are so much into worldly things, material things. They are servile wits, and these are base, very, they are not elevated people. They are base people. They are just like common people, and they are very uninspired. And poetry requires genuine, but genius was lacking in the age. So poetry requires genuine genius, not something very artificial, but genius is needed, which is lacking in this age. Genius is lacking in that particular age that maybe Sydney is referring to, age of Elizabeth. And there is widespread ignorance of poetic art. So maybe because of all this allegation, because of the emergence of various other disciplines, we can see that a widespread ignorance to poetic art is there, and poets have neither knowledge nor imitation of sound models, nor constant exercise or practice. So there is a widespread ignorance towards poetic art from the part of the readers, from the part of the audience who are going to read the poem, and also from the part of the poet as well, because they don't have any knowledge about poetry. First of all, they lack genius, genuine genius they lack, and they don't have any knowledge, and they nor have any imitation of sound models. If they don't have any genuine knowledge, they can actually imitate good models that is there in the history, right? That is there as great models. No, great poets are there, epic poets are there, they can imitate them, but they lack it. The poet of the contemporary age, the then time, they nor had an imitation of sound models, and nor constant exercise. They are not practicing in writing poetry, so they lack the constant practice and exercise writing poetry. Okay, so this is the third reason for the decline of contemporary English poetry. And the fourth reason is fault of contemporary tragedy. Now, these three are the major reasons for decline of contemporary English poetry. Now he is telling about the fault with the contemporary tragedies. Okay, he condemns it for mingling tragic and comic elements. This is the violation of unities. So Aristotle in his Poetics, he says about three unities, right? Unity of time, unity of place, and unity of action. So this must be kept very strictly in order to have a tragic effect, okay? So in contemporary tragedy by university wits, by Shakespeare and all, so Sydney cannot tell much about Shakespeare, but still in contemporary drama we can see that he condemns the mingling of or coexistence of tragic and comic elements, and that itself the violation of unity of action especially, and every other unities are not strictly followed in tragedies. And he praises Gorboduc for its elevated style and eloquence proper to tragedy. So while saying fault with the contemporary tragedy, he praises Gorboduc. Gorboduc is considered as the first tragedy in English, okay? And he praises Gorboduc for its elevated style and eloquence, for its elevated style and eloquence proper to tragedy, because he considered that in Gorboduc you can find a proper balance between three unities, especially unity of action. Okay, now let's see what he is saying. And he condemns tragic comedy. So tragic comedy happens when you mingle tragic and comic elements together in a great proportion. Okay, he condemns tragic comedy. He is against the incongruous mixing of tragic and comic elements. Again, I have already told you this. And he writes, there should be no mingling of kings and clowns. So this is a point that he makes while he condemns tragic comedy. So you should not mingle. You should not mix and mingle kings and clowns or born pipes with funerals. You cannot mingle, you cannot mix. Born pipes means pipes that were blown when a baby is born, and with funeral pipes, blown when someone is dead. You cannot mingle these two because these two are contradictory. It cannot coexist within the same genre. And he condemns tragic comedy. And next he finds faults with contemporary comedy. Now he tells sufficiently about tragedy and tragic comedy. He now turns to comedy. He again condemns contemporary farcical comedy. So he says that contemporary comedy is worthless and it is farcical. It contains nothing. He distinguishes between laughter and delight, and he confutes the current notion that there could be no delight without laughter. So first of all, he distinguishes laughter and delight. So do remember that he distinguishes between, Philip Sidney distinguishes between laughter and delight in his work, A Defense of Poetry, while he finds faults with the contemporary comedy. So he distinguishes between laughter and delight, and he confutes, and he goes against the current notion that if you want a delight, you need to laugh. And he confused the current notion that there could be no delight without laughter. See, in comedy, if you want to have delight, then laughter part must be there. And he says delight is permanent, while laughter is merely scornful tickling. Okay, so what is you are getting in the form of delight? When you have delight, delight is permanent. It's a permanent kind of pleasure. But laughter is a kind of momentary thing. It's a ticklish thing that will happen in a moment and you will produce some laughter. That's it for laughter. But delight is a permanent thing. Okay. And he further says that comedy should have nothing to do with painful deformity and things evil and vicious. So usually if you see comedy, you'll see that we will scorn or we will make laughter out of someone's deformity, physical deformities, physical difficulties, or evil that we could find in someone, or some vicious qualities someone possesses. So in that way, some disqualities that people, physical or behavioral disqualities that people possess, out of that we will create comedy. Usually we will see such kind of comedy. But he says that comedy should have nothing to do with what is comedy, and comedy should have nothing to do with this kind of painful deformity of people or things that are evil and vicious. They may cause laughter, but they cannot give delight. So if you use such kind of deformity, painful deformity and evil and vicious things related to people to create comedy, to create laughter, Laughter can be produced out of them, but delight cannot. So the proper material for comedy are the weakness, follies, and foibles of mankind of a harmless kind. So you should not use evil, vicious, and painful deformity, but you have to use weakness, follies, errors, and foibles of mankind of harmless type of weakness, follies, foibles in order to create comedy. That is the proper material for creating comedy. Okay. So these are his observation about contemporary poetry, tragedy, and comedy. Now he tells about love poetry and its faults. Now see, he says that contemporary love poems, they are cold. So contemporary love poetry is cold and unmoving. It is not moving human mind. It is not enlightening human mind and moving the human mind into a higher level and moving man to do good virtuous actions. And its style is ornate and unnatural. So he says that poetry, love poetry, contemporary love poetry is cold and unmoving, and the style of contemporary love poetry is ornate. Ornate means too much ornaments are used, figurative language, this and that, rhymes, and many more for figurative ornamental things they are using. And it is ornate and unnatural, very artificial love poetry we can find in the contemporary time, then time, entirely unsuitable for the expression of passion. So in love poetry they are expressing the passion of love, okay, the passion. And this kind of ornamented and unnatural way of style of writing poetry is totally unsuitable for expressing such passion of love. So that is his observation. Next he says the diction of contemporary poetry and faults, the choice of words that poets make in contemporary poetry while they are composing a poetry and its faults. And poets use far-fetched words. So he says that they are using far-fetched words, very unfamiliar words, very far removed words they are using. Not only words, images also far-fetched, which is not familiar to the readers. And they have fond of puns and wordplay. Puns means they are wordplay only, or they will, they will play around a concept, or they will play around a word, quibbling. Okay, so the contemporary poets, they will quibble around, they will play around words, they will make puns out of words and word meanings, and they will use far-fetched, unfamiliar, far removed words and images in their poetry, and that is not a favorable thing to do. And they write in ornate, pompous style, which instead of clarifying, bewilders and confuses the reader. So he says that ornate means they are using too much ornaments in the form of figurative speech, in the form of rhyme scheme, in the form of this and that. They are using many ornamented things in poetry, and they will make a pompous and bombastic style in poetry. They are using such kind of styles. So that kind of style and far-fetched words, usage of such images and all, it will confuses the readers. It will bewilders and it will surprise the readers instead clarifying them. It only helpful in creating confusion and bewilderness, not clarification, not any explanation of anything. And he says that true art lieth in concealing art. So this is a famous uh, thing that he makes in here. True art lies in concealing art. What is true art? True art must lie. True art must conceals or hide art, in the sense that it's like everything in a poetry should be smooth and coexisting in an organic whole, as an organic part of each other. Like one should not feel when one read the poetry, it should not feel that it is reading a poetry by seeing its ornate language and pompous style. Okay, of course they are reading a poetry and they know it, but when they read it, They should impart a higher level of knowledge and information, higher truth and virtuous action, move towards their virtuous action. That is the true end of good poetry. So instead of doing that, if the reader is struck with the far-fetched words, ornate style and pompous and bombastic style that is there in a poetry, then that is not a good poetry. It only confuses the reader. So that's why he says that true art lies in concealing art. Okay. Now we have moved to the end part of the work, in which he says about remarks of versification, superiority of English. So towards the end of this defense of poetry, he says about the superiority of English. Even though English was not, only 2 centuries past, towards the end of the 16th century, I mean, not 16th century, towards the end of the 15th century, only English emerged as a court language or national language of England. So he is emphasizing, and he is in the 16th century. So we can see that only not more than 2 centuries passed that English becoming a national language. So he is telling about the superiority of English from a literary point of view. Okay. English is superior to any other continental languages since it is fit for the classical and contemporary system of writing. So this is the first point that he makes about the superiority of English. He says that English is superior to any other continental languages that is there in the Europe. So Sydney is telling that English is very superior language because it is fit for both classical and contemporary kind of writing. There is a system of contemporary kind of writing and there was a system of classical kind of writing. So English is fit for both the composition in these two systems. So English is a superior or elevated kind of language than any other continental languages. And English is capable of all three kinds of rhyme, male, female and shrutiola. Okay. So three kind of rhymes that Sydney mentions here, the male, the female and shrutiola. So what are they? So English is capable to create all these three kinds of rhyme schemes. First one is the male. So in male rhyme scheme, in which only the last syllables of the word rhymes. So in poetry, what is male? What is meant by male rhyme? In male rhyme scheme, only the last syllable of a word rhymes. Only the last syllable of a word rhymes. So that is the male rhyme schemes. So English is suitable for that, and English is also suitable for the female rhyme scheme. So what is it? The last two syllables rhymes. The last two syllable of a word rhymes. If only the last one syllable is rhyming, then that is male. The female is the last two syllables are rhyming, then that is female, and English is suitable to create that. And the third one is shrutiola. Shrutiola means three syllables rhyme. Okay. If three syllables of a word rhymes in a poetry, then that is shrutiola. That is the third category of rhyme that Sydney refers. So English is suitable for the male, female and shrutiola kind of rhyme scheme. So that is English is a superior kind of language. Okay, and he attempts to introduce classical meter into English. So basically Sydney is attempting to introduce a classical meter into English, and because he was a member of the group known as Aeropagus. Okay, so Philip Sidney was a member of the Aeropagus, a group known as Aeropagus, a society of poets. So Aeropagus is a society of poets, scholars, with the aim of introducing classical meters into English. So their main aim is to introduce classical meters into English and enrich English poetry. Okay, so Aeropagus, do remember that Sydney is part of, and Sydney is a member of Aeropagus, which is aiming at introducing classical meter into English, and Sydney is also doing that. He says, and he introduces classical meters into English. So these are some of the arguments that or points that Sydney makes in defense of poetry. I hope this was clear to you. I have given important titles for each point. If you have just written these titles, then this will be sufficient for you to remember it. Come back to these points and videos more and more times, because so that you could remember each of the points. And yeah, if you have any suggestions, queries and questions, and if you want me to make such contents for you, then you can mention all that in the comment section. And you can meet me or find me in either of these platforms. If you want any help for your UGC net, you can always call me, WhatsApp me. If you want to know where you have to start your studying, if you want to know how you have to start studying, if you want to know how you can create your own timetable, what is the strategy that you have to apply for studying UGC net English language and literature, then you have to call me. I'll be very glad to lend my help as far as I can. And also you can visit my website www.highpoint.in in order to know what you want to study. Even if you don't want to subscribe, go and visit my website, because you will get an outlook about what are topics you have to cover. Because NTA syllabus is just an indicative syllabus. There you will find words like poetry, prose, fiction, novel. Such kind of indicative syllabus is there for NTA UGC net. So if you want an explanation, and we have spreaded and we have elaborated this syllabus for you under 12 topics, and further modules and chapters are there. You can look each one of them by getting into a free trial. And also you can have demo materials. You can have the demo PDF materials and also demo question papers. If you like, you can subscribe, of course, and you can join the WhatsApp group, guys. I have given the link in the description box. You can click the link there, and you can join it, and you can have daily quizzes, notes that I'm sharing there, and news and updates related to UGC net NTA net English language and literature there. So thank you for watching my video. If you have yet not subscribed in my channel, please subscribe to my channel and press the like button. That will encourage me to create these kind of videos. And let me meet you in the next video. Until then, bye bye. Thank you.